You are a Roman guard posted outside a sealed stone chamber in Alexandria. Behind those walls is Cleopatra, Queen of Egypt, Pharaoh, heir of the Ptolemies, the most powerful woman of the ancient world. She has been confined there for 7 days. At times, you hear her, not sobbing, not screaming, but moving. Soft footsteps against stone. The faint whisper of fabric. Occasionally, her voice, speaking as though another person is present, even though you know without question she is alone. Before going further, there is something crucial you must understand about Cleopatra's death. Nearly everything you believe about it is wrong. The romantic tale of the asp concealed in a basket of figs is almost certainly invented. The image of Cleopatra passing peacefully in her royal bed, attended by loyal handmaidens, is also almost certainly a myth. What truly unfolded inside those sealed chambers between August 1st and August 1230 BCE was something far more intentional, far more calculated, and far more revealing of how Rome eliminated its enemies. This is not a story of suicide. It is the story of a deliberate psychological campaign designed to break the final Pharaoh of Egypt before allowing her to die. The real question is not how Cleopatra died. It is why Octavian required her death to happen in a very specific manner, and why he needed 10 days to accomplish it. If understanding how power functions at its most controlled and methodical matters to you, consider subscribing. This channel exists to uncover the mechanisms of domination that shaped ancient civilizations, mechanisms romantic history prefers to ignore. Let me show you what actually happened during Cleopatra's final 10 days alive. The destruction began on August 1st 30 BCE. Inside the tomb Cleopatra had constructed for herself, Mark Antony was dying. He had fallen upon his own sword after being falsely informed that Cleopatra was already dead. But she was not. She had sealed herself inside the tomb with her 2 most loyal handmaidens and as much treasure as she could transport. The tomb stood near the Temple of Isis, a solid, 2-story stone structure with massive wooden doors and no easy points of entry. It was built like a fortress, because Cleopatra understood that in death she would require the same protection she demanded in life. Antony lay bleeding at the base of the tomb. His men pleaded with Cleopatra to open the doors. She refused. She could not risk it. Octavian's soldiers were only minutes away. According to Plutarch, Cleopatra and her attendants lowered ropes from the upper level and hauled Antony upward through a high opening, dragging him inside while he still lived. His blood streaked the stone walls as they pulled him up. Consider that image, the Queen of Egypt hauling her dying lover into her tomb because opening the door meant capture. Antony died in her arms in the upper chamber. His final words, recorded by Plutarch, were these: "Do not pity me in this last turn of fate. I was the greatest of Romans, defeated only by another Roman." He died believing his life had meaning. Cleopatra had only moments to mourn before Octavian's forces arrived. But Octavian did not assault the tomb. He did not smash the doors or force entry. Instead, he sent a messenger, Gaius Proculius. The message was simple. Caesar wished to discuss terms of surrender and the future of her children. Cleopatra refused to open the doors. She spoke to Proculius through a narrow crack in the stone, stating she would negotiate only if Octavian guaranteed her children's safety. As she spoke, Proculius's men scaled the outer walls. They entered through the same opening used hours earlier to pull Antony inside. They caught her by surprise. Cleopatra reached for a dagger concealed in her clothing and attempted to kill herself. But the soldiers were prepared. They rushed her, disarmed her, and restrained her. According to Cassius Dio, Cleopatra screamed as they seized her, "You will not take me alive to Rome. You will not parade me. Kill me now." But the soldiers had explicit orders. Keep her alive. Use any force necessary. Do not let her die. They removed her from the tomb, transported her to the palace, and sealed her inside a guarded chamber on the 2nd floor. That moment, August 1st, was when the real destruction began. Octavian did not simply want Cleopatra dead. He needed something precise from her death. And that required time. Egypt, the wealthiest kingdom in the ancient world, was now his. But in Rome, Octavian faced a problem. He had just won a civil war. Romans killing Romans. Citizens spilling the blood of citizens. He needed justification. He needed to reframe the conflict. It could not be remembered as a civil war. It had to become something simpler. A war against a foreign enemy. A war against a dangerous Eastern queen who had corrupted Mark Antony and threatened Rome itself. But Cleopatra was no barbarian. She was educated, multilingual, and politically astute. She had lived in Rome. She spoke Latin. She had met senators and negotiated with Cicero. Romans knew she was not a caricature, and that was the problem. Complex enemies make poor propaganda. Octavian needed to simplify her. He needed to transform her from a political rival into a symbol. The Eastern seductress. The Egyptian witch. The foreign corruption that had to be destroyed for Rome to survive. Above all, he needed to parade her alive through the streets of Rome in his triumph. Cleopatra understood exactly what that parade meant, and she would rather die than allow it. Octavian had 10 days to make sure she did not. Roman triumphs followed a strict formula. A defeated king or queen was led through the streets in chains, displayed before the crowd, publicly humiliated, and at the end of the procession, traditionally executed in the Tullianum prison. Victory was celebrated through ritualized degradation of the conquered. Octavian's entire political future depended on that spectacle, on presenting Cleopatra as living proof that he had defeated the East. But Cleopatra knew the formula. She had witnessed triumphs before. She had been in Rome in 44 BCE during Caesar's Gallic triumph. She had seen Vercingetorix dragged through the streets in chains and later strangled in the Tullianum. She knew precisely what Octavian intended for her. Two wills stood in direct opposition. 10 days remained to resolve it. This is how Octavian approached the problem. The chamber where Cleopatra was confined was carefully selected. Second floor of the palace. One door. One narrow window, too small for escape. Guards stationed outside day and night. Every potentially dangerous object removed. No blades. No ropes. No sharp tools of any kind. According to Plutarch, her clothing and hair were searched daily. Hidden weapons. Poison. Anything she might use to end her life. Cleopatra was stripped of everything except basic garments and left alone in an empty stone room. But Octavian's strategy went beyond confinement. He did not merely need to stop her from dying. He needed to extinguish her desire for death. Consider the psychology. Cleopatra wanted death because death meant dignity. Death meant control. Death meant Octavian could never parade her through Rome. So Octavian had to invert that instinct. He had to make her want to live. And to accomplish that, he used the one thing she could not abandon, her children. Cleopatra had 4. Caesar Ion, her son by Julius Caesar, was 17. The twins, Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selene, were 10. The youngest, Ptolemy Philadelphus, just 6, was also Antony's. Octavian's men separated them from her immediately. They were moved to different locations within the palace and placed under guard. On August 2nd, the day after her capture, Octavian sent another messenger. Not Proculius this time, but Gaius Cornelius Gallus, poet, soldier, diplomat. The message was precise. Controlled. Elegantly cruel. Caesar wishes you to know that your children are being well cared for. Their future depends entirely upon your cooperation. Should anything happen to you, Caesar cannot guarantee their safety. Caesar Ion, in particular, is in a most delicate position. Cleopatra understood at once. Caesarion was the biological son of Julius Caesar. That fact alone turned him into a danger for Octavian, whose power depended on his status as Caesar's adopted successor. If Cleopatra were to die, Caesarion would be left exposed. He would not survive. But if Cleopatra remained alive, if she complied, if she yielded, if she allowed herself to be used, then there was a chance Caesarion might live. Perhaps all her children would. This was the snare. Octavian handed Cleopatra a reason to stay alive that directly clashed with her reason to seek death. Her honor called for death. Her children demanded life. For 10 days, Cleopatra lived inside that unbearable decision, suspended between dignity and motherhood. On August 3rd, the pressure intensified. Octavian sent architects into her chamber. They came carrying measuring rods, marked cords, wax tablets for notes. They measured her height, estimated her weight, recorded the proportions of her body. Plutarch, drawing on testimony from one of Cleopatra's surviving handmaidens, records that the queen asked what they were doing. One architect replied that they were preparing for Caesar's triumph. The display must be properly constructed to fit you. Consider the meaning of that moment. She was being measured like an object, like furniture, like a figure meant to be built into a structure. These men were not merely taking measurements. They were delivering a message: this will happen. You are going to Rome. The cage is being built now. And they returned the following day, August 4th. Then August 5th. Then August 6th. Each visit brought more measurements, more questions. What garments would she wear? What jewelry would a Roman audience recognize? Would she appear in chains, or only restrained? They debated these details in her presence, discussing presentation and visual impact. They spoke of her humiliation as though it were an artistic design. This was not preparation. It was conditioning. Each day the architects came back, and with every visit, death grew more tempting. But every day, Octavian counterbalanced that pull with another message: news of her children. Caesarion asked about you today. He is afraid. He needs his mother. Draw her toward death with the horror of the triumph. Pull her back toward life with fear for her children. Hold her suspended between the two. Cleopatra was alone in the chamber. The two handmaidens who had been with her in the tomb, Iras and Charmian, were confined to separate rooms. At times she could hear them, their voices faintly echoing through stone walls, but she was forbidden to speak with them. No one to confide in. No one to plan with. No one to share the burden of the impossible decision being forced upon her. Cassius Dio records that Cleopatra repeatedly asked to see her children and was denied each time. Not until Caesar is certain of your cooperation. Yet she could hear them. The palace walls carried sound easily. Sometimes she heard the younger children playing, laughter drifting through a narrow window too small for escape. Imagine that torment, hearing your children close by, knowing they are near enough to hear but not close enough to touch. Not knowing whether those sounds were genuine or staged. Not knowing if they were safe, or if the noise itself was part of the manipulation. Modern psychology would call this learned helplessness. Strip a person of agency. Remove their choices. Make them dependent on their captor for even the most basic information about the people they love. Octavian executed this method with precision. By August 7th, according to Plutarch, Cleopatra stopped eating. When food was brought, she refused it. She sat in silence, staring at the stone walls. The guards reported this immediately. Octavian did not respond by forcing her to eat. Instead, he brought Caesarion. For the first time in 6 days, Cleopatra saw her eldest son. The meeting was brief. Guards stood close the entire time. But Plutarch records Caesarion's words. Please eat. Please take care of yourself. I need you. We all need you. Then he was taken away. That night, Cleopatra ate. And that tells you everything. The threat to her children was no longer an abstraction. It had a voice. A face. A plea. How do you choose death when your child is begging you to live? On August 8, Octavian came in person. It was the first direct conversation he had with Cleopatra since her capture. He arrived alone, aside from guards stationed outside the door. We do not have a complete transcript of what was said, but fragments remain, from Plutarch, who interviewed survivors, from Cassius Dio, who accessed Roman records, from Strabo, who was in Alexandria soon after. The proposal was straightforward. Participate willingly in the triumph. Walk through Rome under your own power, not in chains. Preserve some dignity in defeat. In return, your children will live, all of them, including Caesarion. They will be taken to Rome, raised as wards of the state, educated, protected, given futures. Refuse, and Caesarion dies the day you do. The younger children might survive. They might not. No guarantees were offered. Cleopatra asked for time to think. Octavian granted her 3 days. After that, Rome would sail, with or without her cooperation. Choose. This was the brilliance of the trap. Octavian was not offering her an escape. What he offered was justification, a way for Cleopatra to convince herself that enduring humiliation served some greater end. That surrender was not weakness, but sacrifice, made for the sake of her children. It was a lie. Octavian never intended to spare Caesarion. The boy represented too great a threat. But Cleopatra did not yet know this. For 3 days, she existed in suspension, caught between hope and despair. Then, on August 11, 30 BC, something shifted. We don't know precisely what occurred. The sources are vague and fragmented, but something made the truth unmistakable to her. Perhaps she overheard a guard speaking. Perhaps a loyal supporter managed to send word. Perhaps she simply understood Octavian well enough to see past the performance. However it happened, by August 11 Cleopatra knew Caesarion would die. The negotiations were theater. The assurances were empty. Cooperation would change nothing. Octavian intended to kill her son no matter what choice she made. Plutarch records that Cleopatra then asked permission to visit Antony's tomb. She claimed she wished to leave offerings in his honor before her journey to Rome. The request seemed reasonable, and Octavian approved it. She was escorted to the tomb under heavy guard and allowed inside for 1 hour. The soldiers observed as she made her offerings, watched her pray, watched her pour libations where Antony had died. They did not see her palm the small clay vial concealed within the tomb wall. They did not notice her slip it into her clothing. When Cleopatra returned to her chamber, she requested a meal. She specifically asked for figs, fresh figs from the market. The guards examined the basket carefully. They searched for weapons, poison, anything dangerous. They found only fruit, and allowed it through. This is where the story of the snake begins. The familiar version claims Cleopatra hid an asp, an Egyptian cobra, inside the basket of figs. It is dramatic and symbolic. The cobra was linked to Egyptian royalty. But several ancient historians, including Strabo, questioned this account. The timeline doesn't fit. The recorded symptoms don't clearly align with cobra venom, and snakes are notoriously unreliable as instruments of suicide. What fits the evidence better is that Cleopatra had obtained poison earlier, hid it in Antony's tomb during the days she was barricaded there, and retrieved it during her final visit. What followed would bring the 10 days to an end and determine whether Cleopatra died broken or in control. The precise method matters less than what came next. August 12, 30 BC. Early in the morning, the guards outside Cleopatra's chamber heard nothing unusual. No cries. No struggle. Only silence. Around the 3rd hour, they opened the door to bring her breakfast. Cleopatra was dead. She lay on a golden couch, dressed in royal regalia. Her 2 handmaidens were with her. Erasure was already dead at the foot of the couch. Charmian was still alive, using her remaining strength to adjust the diadem on Cleopatra's head. According to Plutarch, one of the guards asked her, "Was this well done?" Charmian replied, "Extremely well, fitting for a descendant of so many kings." Then she died. Cleopatra was 39 years old. This was not a suicide born of despair. It was a final assertion of control. For 10 days, Octavian had tried to break her. He tried to make her choose life so he could parade her through Rome. He tried to exploit her love for her children to force her to surrender her dignity. Her death was her refusal. Her last message: "You may take my kingdom. You may destroy my line. But you cannot take my choice. You will not parade me. You will not have that victory." She died on her own terms. Dressed as a queen. Surrounded by the symbols of power Octavian had worked so carefully to strip away. But here lies the final cruelty. Octavian won anyway. Unable to parade the real Cleopatra, he constructed a substitute. A statue. An effigy. During his triumph in Rome, a massive image of Cleopatra, with a snake attached to her arm, was carried through the streets. The Roman crowd saw her defeated. Saw her reduced to the image Octavian wanted them to remember. The propaganda succeeded. The version of Cleopatra as an exotic Egyptian seductress who died by snakebite became the story that survived for 2,000 years. And Caesar Ion, the child Cleopatra believed she might save, was murdered 3 weeks later. Octavian sent assassins to intercept him as he fled toward India. Julius Caesar's only biological son, 17 years old, was killed on a road in the Egyptian desert. The younger children survived. They were paraded in Octavian's triumph in place of their mother. Raised in Rome under the guardianship of Octavian's sister. Watched closely. Given constrained futures. Never allowed to return to Egypt. Cleopatra died believing her sacrifice might protect them. Believing that choosing the manner of her death over participation in Octavian's spectacle was an act of dignity. In reality, Octavian achieved everything he wanted. A propaganda victory. The elimination of rivals. The conquest of Egypt. Control of the narrative. Cleopatra's death bought nothing, except the way she died. And that is what those 10 days reveal about power at its most systematic. Octavian did not merely want to defeat Cleopatra. He wanted to dismantle her psychologically first. To turn her love for her children into a weapon against her will to die with dignity. To construct an impossible choice, dignity or children, and trap her inside it. To measure her for humiliation. To show her exactly what awaited her in Rome. To offer false hope that cooperation might save what mattered most. It was a machine. Every element calculated. Every pressure point mapped. Every moment designed to strip her of agency until surrender felt rational. And when it failed, when Cleopatra chose death anyway, Octavian simply paraded an image instead. That is real power. Not merely the ability to kill, but the ability to control the narrative even when your enemy refuses to comply. If this exposes something unsettling about how ancient power functioned, how defeating enemies was not enough, they had to be broken first. Subscribe and turn on notifications. We'll continue uncovering how systematic destruction shaped the ancient world. Leave a comment with your thoughts on whether Cleopatra's final choice was a victory, a defeat, or both. Stand in Alexandria today. The tomb where Cleopatra died is gone. The palace where she spent her final 10 days lies underwater, lost to earthquakes and time. All that remains are the stories, and the question. She chose death over humiliation. Yet her image was paraded anyway. She died to protect her children. Yet Caesarion was killed. She controlled the manner of her death, but not the story that followed. Those 10 days, from August 1st to August 12th, reveals something essential about power and agency. Sometimes the only choice left is how you lose. Sometimes dignity costs everything and buys nothing except the knowledge that the choice was still yours. Cleopatra died a queen, alone in a sealed stone chamber, accompanied only by 2 loyal handmaidens. She failed to save her kingdom. Failed to save her children. She succeeded only in denying Octavian the satisfaction of parading her living body through Rome. Whether that was enough, whether it mattered, is the question that echoes across 2,000 years. Remember those 10 days. Remember what Octavian built, a psychological machine designed to break the last Pharaoh of Egypt before her death. Remember how close it came to working. And remember why Cleopatra chose death anyway. Not because it saved anything, but because it was the only choice Octavian could not take from her. That is what her final days were. Not romance. Not legend. Just the systematic destruction of agency, and one woman's refusal to let it be complete.